it's all downhill from there. My lawyer will take any complaints later. Thank you so much, and thank you to for what you all do here. I shopped here as a young Washington Monthly editor. Shopped is too strong. We didn't have any money. As you all may remember, Washington Monthly editors were paid $10,000 a year, which is Kate Boo, who won the National Book Award last night, and adding to her amazing list of accomplishments. Kate used to say she knew she had actually graduated from the Monthly when she could buy entrees as well as appetizers in restaurants. So I never actually spent money here, but I'll try to fix that. I am enormously grateful. I am a Southerner. I'm from Tennessee, and think that understanding Jefferson in his regional context as well as his national context and his political context is hugely important. He was a master of politics, whether it was ideologically driven or geographically driven, and I think there's something resonant about a ferociously divided atmosphere, big issues at stake, and a president who's tall, cool, cerebral, pretty good at politics but doesn't like to admit it, having to govern in a fractious atmosphere. There is something that seems familiar about that. So I want to do two quick stories about Jefferson to give you two sides of him very quickly. Matthew Davis, a office seeker from New York, goes to Monticello trying to get an appointment. He would have fit right in this city even now. Travels to lobby for the job. He was a Burr loyalist. Jefferson, not so much a Burr loyalist, as we know. I should quickly add, one of the things I say to my Hamiltonian friends that is at least my guy didn't get shot in Jersey. So, and of all the founders, the most likely to have sent shirtless emails is Alexander Hamilton, not Thomas Jefferson. I want to get that on the record, and then we'll move on. Matthew Davis is sitting there pleading his case, and Jefferson's looking, sort of listening in that vaguely charming way he had. He was a lot like FDR in that you could leave, and everyone who left his company thought he agreed with them, which was a wonderful way to get through the moment, not such a great way to get through a day, as it turns out. And there's a fly buzzing around, and Jefferson's nodding and is in eye contact with Davis and goes, grabs the fly and begins pulling it apart. Davis begins to realize this may not work out quite as well as he hoped. Second story. So there you have the man who can snap a fly, pull it apart, and ferociously focused when he needs to be, often making you think he's not focused. He traveled through, it was a couple of days' ride from Monticello to Washington. He stopped at an inn. He falls into conversation with a fellow guest at the inn, and they have a lovely, wide-ranging discussion. The next morning, the other guest, Mr. Jefferson's up and out, the other guest had never caught his name. And he said to the innkeeper, who was that? And the innkeeper said, well, who did you think it was? And he said, well, for a while I thought he knew so much about medicine, I thought he was a doctor. And then I thought, we talked about theology. He seemed as though he might be a priest, though kind of a shaky one. I thought he could have been certainly a farmer because of everything he knew. And the innkeeper said, oh, well, I thought you knew Mr. Jefferson. He was a master of so many different worlds. He was endlessly curious, and he was endlessly curious at a time when human curiosity and the ability to allow reason to lead us to our own destiny, to fulfill in many ways our greatest potentials, to discover, to explore, was new in the world. You know, this was the Enlightenment era. The scientific revolution had been the day before yesterday. For the first time ever, priestly and princely authority was in the dock, and Jefferson was there to reap the harvest of that shift, that fundamental shift, and was able to take the intellectual life, the intellectual breakthroughs of the Enlightenment, both in Europe and in Scotland, and apply them in many ways to American politics. Self-government was only going to work, in Jefferson's mind, if the people who were governing themselves knew themselves, cared about each other, because why would you sacrifice for someone with whom you had no interest, common interest? And you would find that your individual rights, your individual being, had come from nature or from God, and therefore could not be taken away by the hand of a king or the hands of a mob. And this is the moment he defines, he embodies. It's a remarkable moment. 'Twas bliss to be alive in that very hour. Hugely important. And so here you have Jefferson, who can kill a fly when he needs to, and who can think in the most fundamental, far-reaching ways when he needs to. One hell of a combination. One hell of a combination. What I wanted to do in revisiting Jefferson, obviously, was try to restore him to his context as a politician, partly because I think politics gets too bad a rap these days. It may deserve a semi-bad rap. I don't want to be overly optimistic about this. But we don't really have any other way to govern ourselves until we find something, and we haven't found anything since the first gathering of the cavemen on the savannah who were trying to figure out how not to throw rocks at each other. Politics is all we've got to work out our common interests and to try to move forward together. So even if Jefferson, someone who wanted to be remember on the tombstone as the author of the Declaration of Independence, the author of the Statute for Religious Liberty in Virginia, and the founder of the University of Virginia, he wanted us to remember him for his ideas. It is one of the great acts of misdirection in American history. It is the Kaiser Sose of epitaphs. He sent us off to a place where posterity would focus on equality, liberty, and enlightenment. Hard to argue about those things. Those are pretty good things. He didn't mention that for 40 years, from the time he was 25 until he was about 65, from 1769 till 1809, he was constantly in public office or thinking about getting back into public office. I don't think that's a bad thing. One of my many character flaws is that I like politicians. I think I'm working on it. My name is John, and I have a problem. But I admire men and women who get into the arena and try to make things better. And no, they're not all in it for all the purest of motives, but I don't know about you all. I'm not sure my motives are all that pure all the time either. So if we try to look back and expect the people we think about and talk about to be totally perfect, or we're not going to think about them, or we're just going to demonize them or denounce them, then we're going to foreclose the possibility of learning from the past. And I don't know about you all, but I learn a lot more from sinners than I do from saints. And Thomas Jefferson was surely a sinner. And his ability to master the best part of his political being, his ability to charm, to make people fall in love with him without knowing why, which is one definition of charm. He once was in the drawing room of Margaret Bayard Smith's wonderful early chronicler of Washington, and she missed his name as he came in. And she'd come from a Federalist family that thought Jefferson was the devil incarnate. And so she's sitting there and finds herself falling in love with this very charming man whose eyes were alternately described as brown, blue, and gray. People couldn't even decide what color his eyes were. He was so mysterious even then. He was charming and gracious and funny and witty and totally beguiling. And her husband, who was the editor of the National Intelligencer newspaper, comes in and says, "Oh, Mr. Jefferson, I'm sorry I'm late." And Margaret Bayard Smith's head explodes, because this is supposed to be the embodiment of everything that is wrong in American life, and she just found him to be the most gracious man she'd ever met. He could disarm you that way. There is something poetic in the fact that William Jefferson Clinton is William Jefferson Clinton. By the way, President Clinton is still campaigning somewhere. I don't know how anyone's going to tell him we voted. Maybe he's already starting on the next one. But I want to talk a little bit